And with that sound greeting you, this is the 20th episode of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod. I'm your host, Gary, and this is the podcast where I talk about my world of G.I. Joe, what I'm doing, what interests me, what's going on in the world of G.I. Joe that I'm paying attention to, and then I look at something that I tripped over in my basement as I move things around, my pit, or as my wife affectionately calls it, my mess. And let's begin. It's been a while since I recorded, almost 4 weeks at this point, and I've been busy. There's been a lot going on in my life post-COVID recovery. Some things, some lingering after effects, some doctor's visits, and also everybody else in my family getting sick, but not with COVID, thank goodness. I spent most of the break, unintentional break, getting a few things. Start off with, I got the new O-Ring Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow that I was so excited to pre-order so long ago. And there are some very good review videos on the web. Joe Mauler Works is one on YouTube that was pointed out to me through G.I. Joeberg, and taking them apart out of the package and even doing rivet swaps. He really, if you watch his videos, and I'll put the link in the description for the podcast, is a really good review of everything that these figures now are. And what surprised me the most is that these are all new molds. These are all new tooling. These have new assembly techniques. Aside from the updated plastic, which I have no fear of breaking, we have these great new O-Ring figures that are almost 100% compatible with the vintage 1982, 1994, 2007-ish line. And that's cool. The only biggest difference besides part swapping, because you're not going to be really able to swap the parts too well between vintage O-Rings and these new O-Rings that Hasbro's producing, is the size of the backpack hole. So forget about putting Storm Shadow in your Fang or Cobra Claw. That's really about it. Other than that, these things are near perfect. I'm really impressed with the fact that they really did start from scratch, and that fits in with, like, we lost the molds, or we got rid of the molds, or they junked the molds. But they made new molds to support this line. That shows a real commitment on Hasbro's part from my perspective. And the only thing I'm going to say about this, and if you're doing all new molds, and we'll get into some of the other reveals later from the G.I. Joe 40th Anniversary Hasbro Pulse event, but they chose Snake Eyes version 1/5, 1.5, to mold. And the box art, and you open up and you get the presentation box, has Snake Eyes V2, visor Snake Eyes. But Commando Snake Eyes is inside with the Hector Garrido artwork and the 5, language file card, which is absolutely worthless. It is so sweet to have it. But if you're redoing a Snake Eyes mold for a first release, I'm really shocked that they didn't use version 2 Snake Eyes. I really am. But overall, these are great. I played with them. I set them up on my Terradrome and had them rappelling down, a la the G.I. Joe 21 cover by Ed Hannigan and Klaus Janson. And really cool. They've been hanging out upstairs in my little, what I like to call my Camp Jellystone display, because of a Yogi Bear shampoo bottle / piggy bank that my dad gave me when I was a baby. And they're really great. It's fun to have these things, right? And you can play with them and manipulate them and not fear of, is this the day I snap the thumb, or am I going to break a heel, or, just be able to have fun. And it's good to have new O-Ring figures to play with. I really enjoy that. Hot on those heels, I also managed to score on Mercari a Cobra Commander from 1992. It is the Battle Core Cobra Commander. He's mint on card, but the card is beat to hell, and I got him to open up, but that'll be for a video on the YouTube channel. So the next up is, the big thing happening was I got the Razor Crest, and I'm only going to talk about Star Wars for a little bit. Right now, my Razor Crest is still being piloted by Wild Bill with Mando sitting shotgun. That was my first HasLab, and a little bit on the Mandalorian. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan. I really am not. I enjoy Star Wars. I enjoy all the movies. I've never watched any of the TV shows, the Clone Wars or Rebels. But when Disney Plus was launched, I was one of the many that got hooked on The Mandalorian. I consider myself more of a Mandalorian fan than I do a Star Wars fan, because it's just a little dirty sci-fi. It's not as much science fantasy as the regular Star Wars, but it's there. You got the Force, you got Grogu. But I got the Razor Crest just because it was so cool, and it came. Now, part of the reason why I was busier than heck was when I got the notice from Hasbro Pulse that they were going to be shipping, I said to myself, I have to finish my centerpiece display in my basement. Once I was able to get out of my room, I started finishing painting when I could get, an hour and a half edgewise, and get this table that I am now recording on finished. But the second part of that plan was getting the three big play sets in it as well. The Terradrome fit, no big deal. My Defiant, I made risers. And the problem was, when I was making the risers for the Defiant, I measured everything, measured twice, cut once, and I spaced them out to properly support the Defiant off its axles. The Defiant's axles are loaded all in single shear, so they break off rather easy. You have the wheels that are single shear to the supports, and the supports are single shear into the main gantry. So you have 5 places in each one of those to snap, and with 8 wheels per side, so that's 10 per side single shear loads, and then 20. So with 20 essentially little pegs to break, I raised it up. So I go to place it on it. It's an 1/8 of an inch too wide. And it's after I painted, because why would you check it before you paint? So out came the saw, trimmed that in, got that in. Razor Crest was still on the way. Now, one thing I wanted to do with the Razor Crest, especially because it was allegedly a big vehicle / playset, like the Kitana, which I didn't get, was get the flag. Was get my flag out of its storage spot, which is underneath my stairs into my basement that I walled off and made a closet, and get that set up. And that took 2 nights. Again, stealing about an hour each night to play around and get everything set up, and forgetting how fiddly it was to get the deck all lined up right the first time, and then positioning it properly on my table. And I didn't get it done before I got the Razor Crest. The Razor Crest came in, brought it downstairs, left it in the box. In that time period, though, then I got my flag set up. The setup I have is one of those things. It isn't enough to make it perfect. You have to just get it done. There's more time later. You'll be more motivated to make it better as time goes on. But if you never do it, it never happens. And with something this big that had turned into a workbench, it was imperative for me to make sure that I was putting the thought and effort into finishing it. And I did. I'm super happy. I have a little spot for me to set up and do the podcast, and I'm thrilled. And then I took the Razor Crest out of its box and I assembled it. No issues. Loving it. Kind of sad that Grogu and the off-world Jawa were carded and not in a bag like Din Djarin. I opened up my retail Grogu, put him with it. The 2 carded figures are nestled safely, and just had fun. But the first thing I do is I put Wild Bill in the seat, and I post out on Twitter and to some of my friends at Geo Joburg on their Facebook group was "See You Space Cowboy," because it's been a joke in my head for about 3 weeks after I did the Invader. My quality of mine, I had no issues whatsoever other than putting the front landing gear in backwards. Thank you, Steve. And it's awesome to have open up. It's more, for me, a display piece. This is a little too unwieldy to be a quote-unquote toy like a Sky Striker or a Conquest or my favorite, the 1990 Locust. It's big. It's absolutely a wonderful display piece. I'm hoping that there's an easier way to load the weapons into the weapons locker, because Jason from Order of Battle Pod had his son do it for him, because 10-year-old hands are smaller than 40-something-year-old hands and a little more nimble as well. It's been great, because for me, what my collecting is turning to is what I collect has to bring me joy, or it has to enhance joy I have for other items or other things. So, as a fan of The Mandalorian, the Razor Crest suits me perfectly. I'm getting Star Wars Vintage Collection, but it's all Mandalorian themed. It's not a huge collection, but it's themed, and I have a smaller display from IKEA waiting to be set up. I got to move some extras out of my basement, and I'm still working with my wife on how we're going to plan on me either going to a toy show to set up or do a yard sale or something, just to move some stuff out and create a little more room here, as things are getting kind of cramped as I'm still moving stuff out of my storage a little bit at a time. That's almost done. I'm just trying to get out of that. Speaking of things that enhance joy, I really thought long and hard about this, especially with the new reveals from Hasbro Pulse with the 40th anniversary of A Real American Hero. I'm stepping away from the 6-inch line. And that is not a slam against the 6-inch line. It's absolutely a personal preference for me. For modern G.I. Joes, the 4-inch non-O-ring G.I. Joes, I only have a couple sets. I have the G.I. Joe Renegade set, and I've been here and there working on the G.I. Joe figures from issue 1 through issue 21 to get all those characters there, because my favorite storyline is from issue number 10 through 19, and of course 21, the silent issue, masterpieces of modern comics, and that's where my modern collection is. But the 6-inch collection is hard for me because, number one, it takes up a boatload of room. And the other sad part of the fact is my entire 6-inch G.I. Joe collection is in boxes. Some of them have been taken out. I reviewed them, but they're all back in. And some I haven't even opened up. That actually makes me sad because I'm not enjoying them. And here I am in front of my flag right now, super excited to have the new Storm Shadow and the new Snake Eyes, even though Storm Shadow is trying to sabotage the flag right now, but I'll solve that later after the podcast. But the 6-inch guys just don't have a place. This podcast is the motor pod because I love vehicles. I've always loved vehicles. It's one of the best parts of the G.I. Joe line for me. I love the figures, don't get me wrong, but the fact that they go into vehicles and do, crazy things or mundane things, weapons transport, that's not exactly the most exciting G.I. Joe vehicle in the line. But I had it when I was 5, and I played the heck out of it. But these 6-inch guys get a couple motorcycles, and that's cool and all. And the 6-inch line is just so beautiful. But I haven't really seen anything in the 6-inch line that's done really something super new. Even Valiverse with their 6-inch line, they've done a couple things better than Hasbro, but it's in still the same vein. You're not going to get a watchtower to perch them in. Well, maybe you might. But you're not going to get, a Sky Striker. It's going to be, I think the Hasbro Pulse team said that would be 5.5 feet long. That's huge. You're not going to get a terror drone. Absolutely not going to get a flag. So, as much as I love the classifieds and the detail in the stuff, the first thing I always want to comment when I see the new classifieds is, I hope Ron Ruda is still getting royalty checks for this work, because they're totally cashing in on some of the hard work this guy did, 40 years ago. And that's riding a trend of nostalgia. That's not bringing the brand to the future. That's not saying what is G.I. Joe, a real American hero, or G.I. Joe International Heroes is. What makes a hero now in 2022 versus what was 1982? Not to get too philosophical, but in 1982, Vietnam vets weren't looked upon as guys that did their duty. They were guys that went to a crappy political war that wasn't even technically a war. It was a peacekeeping action. Never got welcomed home. And that was just part of that Reagan era of feeling pride in America again after losing the conflict in Southeast Asia. So here we are in 2022, and we have a much, in America at least, we are more thankful for our armed servicemen, and we are more appreciative of what they do. The G.I. Joe line is about heroes. Much like Adventure Team, G.I. Joe has a firefighter, Barbecue. He's a first responder. That's a hero. 1982, we had Doc. 1986, we had Lifeline. 1990, we had Stretcher. EMTs, medics, they're heroes too. That's one thing I would say is, why isn't there a classified figure on that? Police officer, you have Bulletproof, you have Shockwave. Heroes, not military. We have this different sense of heroes and heroicism and heroics 40 years later. What is Hasbro doing to enhance that in the public consciousness, to attract it to the greater public at large? They're trending on nostalgia, which is not, to me, not a good long-term plan for a brand. There has to be something new to bring in. I know they tried with Snake Eyes Origins. They went about it the absolutely wrong way, with the wrong way of characterization of Snake Eyes, but they tried at least there, right? One of the things too, especially with G.I. Joe, is it's always been a toy first, entertainment secondary. Larry Hama has been pushing the story further in his comic books. IDW did that in other comic books, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. And I know I'm on my soapbox right now, but I know you're listening to this podcast, so obviously you're going to hear me out, or just, hit, plus 30 second on your podcast player until I'm talking about something else, probably comic books. It's the toy line, and we know kids are out of toys earlier and earlier now. My son is almost 7. He's on his iPad playing video games, and he's discovered Minecraft, and I play with him nightly just to make sure, father-son time. But there's no evergreen line. There's no action. There's no, and there are there, but it's such trending on nostalgia. I worry because I love G.I. Joe. I had a 12-inch Joe when I was a kid, and it was a hand-me-down from my brother. But there's always something, 1982, they pushed forward, and Joe line ended when they started riding on trends at the time. Eco Warriors, DEF, Battle Corps, Ninja Force. So I don't know what I'm saying, what point I'm trying to make, but at the end of the day, I'm invested in nostalgia right now at this point as a brand, even though I wanted to move forward. And unfortunately for me, the 6-inch isn't helping that, even though I will say that putting Kamakura as a character in one of the newest waves is a great move. Although Larry Hama calls him Throwdown now. So with that being said, on comic books, we finally got issue 289 of A Real American Hero, a Jinx and Dawn storyline. Yeah, you want to get me to buy another classified? Do a Dawn. You want to do another new O-Ring? Do a Dawn. I don't care. Do a Dawn. She's a new character. She's cool. You know what? And do some Blue Ninjas too. Who cares? I don't care if you hate them or if you like them, but do some Blue Ninjas. We got somebody else to fight. And Hama, did a really good job with this book. I like it. I like the way he's almost got his groove back, and there's a great thing going on as they're closing up the year. But it's kind of sad, but that's kind of when they're taking risks because there is an end now. Everything's gelling, and and that's just what happens. Just when things are starting to get, in my opinion, better again, it's going to end, and will be bittersweet if they make the 300 by the end of the year. They will, but I bet you 10 to 1 we're going to see some quality cutting in that department. And I don't know what it's going to be and what to blame it on, but I'm just unfortunately putting that thought out into the cosmos. But the other book that came out in my little hiatus was the Saturday Morning Adventures G.I. Joe Real American Hero. And I really like the fact that A Real American Hero is on this book. When this book was announced, I had high hopes for it. I had read Eric Burnham's work and Dan Shanning's art with Delgado's colors and Uyatake's letters on the Ghostbusters books. I knew they were going to do a bang-up job with this one. Not spoiling anything because it's in the previews. It essentially is Cobra Commander gets the genie lamp, and what is he going to wish for? And this is something straight out of the cartoon series. It is perfectly in line with that flavor of humor, the art with the animation style, the colors being popping off the page like they would be on the screen. It's a 3-run home run. Picking nits, there was one panel I didn't like. On page 2, Cobra Commander is pointing his pistol kind of off the page. Makes you think that he's pointing it at his subordinates that are surrounding him. And then the first panel of page 3, it's this urn that's being shot and blown up. It's really like a little disjointed there. I think for that second panel, there should have been like a middle panel in between of him putting it down or sweeping the camera around for that panel, like over his shoulder, shooting it and blowing up. Like instead of such a close-up shot, maybe pull back the shot a little bit. But other than that, this was incredibly enjoyable in the fashion of a G.I. Joe miniseries or 2-parter. Very good. I'm sad it's only a 4-issue mini because this could really be a good way to do one-shots or minis. But alas, we all know what's happening with the license. It's ending. So really happy that at least IDW is going to be bringing G.I. Joe out on a high note, and I would rather feel sad that IDW is losing the license because that at least shows a commitment from everybody of care in their own work. This week, I'm going to take a look at another vehicle that I managed to complete and fix up, and that is the 1989 G.I. Joe Raider with its commander, Hot Seat. And I'm saying commander, not driver, because the Raider is a tank, and tanks have commanders. They don't have just drivers. Although, in many cases in G.I. Joe, the commander is the driver. That's really great how the modern technology the G.I. Joe team has replaces the standard structure of a tank in modern combat. We'll start off with Hot Seat. And the cool thing about Hot Seat is he's more than one color. He's kind of plain a little bit like Armadillo. He's got a green torso with molded on padding. He's got, tan sleeves on his arms with some skin showing, some forearm skin showing before black gloves. He's got these reddish orange pants with red pads on the sides, and the pads on his thighs are similar in style to the pads on his shoulders. And for continuity's sake, I would have probably said paint the shoulder pads the same color as the leg pads. Black boots, and has a black belt going through a couple loops with a little hip flask on his left hip for water or other beverages for taking into battle. Now, he has kind of grayish hair, and his eyes are painted the same color gray in the eyebrows, which implies that he's an older Joe. That works for me. Got a little bit of an older face go. He's got, the smile lines going down from his nose through his cheeks into the chin. So he looks distinguished. But then he also has this cool black helmet. It's nice. It's bulky enough that it actually looks like a helmet. It's got a little tube that goes down from the right ear into the helmet, which, I don't know, must be for some communications measure. It's a band across the back going from earpiece or to earmuff to earmuff. He's got a targeting sight over his left eye. And the other great part is a molded on microphone. So you ain't losing this unless you break it off. And there's even little speaker details on the edge of the microphone, which makes this a cool figure in its own right. But I'm more impressed by the helmet than the rest of the figure. It really could use some love in the paint apps department. And if I could find an extra hot seat, maybe eventually, like I keep talking about, maybe I'll find some paint from Hobby Lobby and clean him up a little bit and accentuate him. That's the Commander. Overall, good guy to have because you have the Raider. Now, the first thing that struck me about the Raider is it reminds me of 1986's Havoc because it has something that separates from it. Now, whereas the Havoc, you split open the back and then the hovercraft comes out, and the Havoc is still usable as a vehicle. It can still go around and wreak havoc on the Cobra forces. However, the Raider has two sets of articulated tread. And the front set can pop out with a driver and almost like a skid steer with its main gun attack the enemy. And starting off with this first portion is you have these gray tracks. They're dark gray, and in the middle of them is where the pivot axle would be. You have a lighter gray cockpit with a smoked canopy that flips down. The smoked canopy is round, like a bubble, like a half bubble, and it covers the driver in there or whoever you have piloting it. Has a black gun tip on the front, and the back is a engine type thing with really large exhaust for essentially no motor in there. So, and it's not even well shielded. So one hit in the back, and this thing's dead in the water. So it's not going anywhere. The other thing is too, the lighter gray center portion where your character is can pivot up about 45 degrees and then down to about level. It works as well as the front suspension of the Raider when it's attached, and also on its own as providing some sort of elevation for the, not just, point and shoot. Now when it pops out, you have two little kickstands that pop down. Easiest way to do it would be the stands on an 18-wheeler trailer that pop out and, elevate the trailer so when the tractor moves out. And those are in black. And then the chassis is in the same light gray as the center portion of the little front scouting vehicle, and then the same treads are on the back as on the front. So the other cool thing is when they were designing the Raider, they came out with one tool or one part to do all four treads. So even though they snap in different places, there's holes in each one of these to accommodate it, so you couldn't misassemble this. That's looking at that, that's a pretty clever way to get around having a special one for the front and different ones for the back. Could have been 4 different parts, but is one part does it all. On the gray base, you have the body of the Raider. Now, the body of the Raider starts off with the chassis being the same gray plastic, and it mounts to the chassis via this larger circular snap-on component. The Raider can swivel on its base much like the top of a tank, Mobat, or even the Mauler. So even though the treads might be going front forwards, the rest of the tank can pivot around to fire all around 360 degrees. And that even works because you can use the driver of the scouting vehicle as a driver for the rest of the Raider. So this way the Raider can rotate around like a regular tank. Now, when the Raider's all together, it looks as though, Hot Seat will be in the front and he'd be driving it. But with this little added dynamic, it feels more natural to me as a tank. The body is in a wonderful tan. It really evokes 1990s desert warfare, especially with Kuwait and everything. And my copy actually doesn't have any stickers on it. It really needs to be finished, cleaned up. I did one before, but I can still see spots where I missed as I'm looking at it, doing this review. It has 2 big black cannons on each side with 2 barrels each. It has a twin-barreled machine gun mounted at the very tip of the body. And behind that is the cockpit, molded in that light gray. And it is wonderfully detailed once you get the canopy up. It has textured seats for the driver or for the commander and somebody else next to him, maybe a commanding officer. You have screens on there. And the one thing that it really could use is joysticks or something. Much like if you have a Defiant or a Crusader shuttle, you open up the top and you have those little things that swivel around the front of your figure, so they have something to touch and use when they fly off. This kind of needs that, because right now you put your guy in there, you buckle the seatbelt down, and they're kind of sitting there and they're kind of looking. So the only thing I could think of is this is hands-free wireless technology from 1989. But it's also a toy, and I got to remember that. So as a toy, it works. The body of the Raider also splits into 2. And you have to press down on the back portion of it to unseat the clips, and then gently pull it out, and then you flip it up. And you have this black elevation system that pulls out all the way, and then you turn it 90 degrees, and it clips on underneath the forward part of the body to maintain the elevation. And that reveals 2 orange missiles, black tipped, and they sit in there and they fire off, they clip in place. It's really cool. It gives it some real firepower. This thing really looks like it would do some damage. On top of this portion of the body, you have 2 spot lamps that snap into place. It just adds more detail, especially when this is out. It's like, you're jacklighting some deer with your 4x4 with your Casey daylighters on your roll bar. It is just a fun vehicle. I've really enjoyed taking it apart and playing with it over the couple days that I had it out. One thing that is a huge attraction to the Raider is it's a fragile vehicle. It is. I have a parts Raider sitting behind me, and I was like, oh, let me see what I can swap off of it. And there was nothing. It's a shell. It's a broken shell. It's basically garbage, and I can't throw anything away. Because what this Raider needed was a spotlight. Went on eBay. Spotlights are very hard to come by. When you do come by, they can be about $20 a piece. So I just left it in my watch list for a while, and then lo and behold, somebody was selling a whole rear section of a Raider in a lot for about $30. So I bought it because it came with 2 spot lamps, because if one broke, I want to have a spare. And it came in, swapped the spot lamps out very carefully, and now my Raiders were whole. Other things I noticed though, the 2 clips on the black, let's call it the elevator, when the parts that clip into the back of the front part of the body, those are fragile. And mine on my Raider do show some wear. So when I was setting it up to make sure I could do a proper review, I noticed that mine have wear on it. So those I'm very delicate with, right? And then the other thing is very common, the two side posts that hold the cannons, those are commonly broken on shells. And then the final part that seems to also be broken on a lot of them is the canopy. The canopy is the same smoked glass as the cup that's for the scouting vehicle. And mine, while I was ratcheting it up and ratcheting it down, it has a very simple, way, just two little tabs that just, push the plastic, which, 30 years ago was a little more flexible. And one of my pins cracked. It's still on there. I'm probably going to have to fix it with some glue at some point, but I'm not. I'm still being very gentle with it. The canopy is warped from storage, so that is something that to consider with this. And that's about it. The body, there's a lot of nice detailing all around this. They didn't have to make the chassis detailed, so when you turn the body of the Raider on the main chassis, that you get to see the engine and the fuel tanks and little covers and stuff with the rivets or screws or bolts. They didn't have to show all that. There's a hatch on the top of the Raider that goes nowhere, but we can call it like a service hatch. It doesn't open. That there's a lost opportunity there, but it's nicely detailed. There's details all around it, and to me, that makes this toy stand out more. It makes me want to play with it. And unfortunately, the fragility of this plastic, where it just loses its elasticity over time for a variety of reasons, probably mostly storage. This was from a collection, and the gentleman I bought it from, it was his when he was a boy, him and his brothers, and all this collection that I bought from him was stored in an attic. And it's a toy also that, when it's complete, commands a reasonable premium on eBay and other secondary sites. Finding one for a good deal isn't always easy. The big things to look out for on this thing is make sure the shell's not broken. I would say make your canopy. The canopy was the harder thing for me to find. I didn't find a single canopy for sale when I was searching for the spotlights. That is just things to be aware of with the Raider. It's a great vehicle, but when you find one, and if you're looking for one, if you're not patient, be prepared to spend. Easiest way I could say it. One reason why I love the Raider was in G.I. Joe 114, titled Metalhead. It's featured prominently, and it gets to the end of the issue, doesn't get blown up by Metalhead, but that's where Hot Seat announces the end of the Benzene War. Because of that placement, and it was kind of like a spotlight issue. It's like, Hasbro would tell Larry Hama to be like, okay, I want you to spotlight this new toy. It was definitely one of those issues where, yeah, we're selling you the Hammer, we're selling you the Raider, because the Raider was available in 1990 as well with the Hammer, so it had been on the same shelf in the toy aisle, and it sold me the toy. It sold me the coolness of the toy. Months ago, when I brought it home out of storage, I knew what I needed to replace, and it took me this long to finally get something that I felt was a deal enough to complete it. If I was to grade the Raider on a scale of 0 to 5 needle nose missiles, because that's what it's called on the box, this is an absolute 4. It is a fun toy. This belongs on the battlefield with G.I. Joe just as much as the Havoc. It belongs just as much as a Mauler. It's great. It has a lot of play value in it. It's fun. It looks terrific. It is futuristic and practical. I mean, after handling it for a while, it is absolutely one of my better vehicles. In my collection, I'm only going to have one. It could benefit from having a second one if I had a second one. But right now, I'm happy with the one I have. And other than the fact that I have a cracked pin right now on the canopy, which I'm being very delicate about, it is absolutely something that I want to have. Now, aside from the 4-foot pegs on either side of the Raider, who would man it? Well, in issue 114, Steeler loses his Mobat and he goes in the Raider. So there's one guy that I would put with hot seat. And then in the scouting vehicle, you know who I'd put in it? I'd put Bazooka. And not just any Bazooka, not Tiger Force Bazooka, not 1985 Bazooka. 1993 Battle Corps Bazooka absolutely belongs with the Raider. I think he'd have fun going boom. And that concludes this episode of the Chaplain's Assistant's Motor Pod, the strange but not estranged nerdy little brother of the PintOComics.com broadcasting family. Like PintOComics.com, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play. We're also on Anchor.fm, our host, Good Pods, and other places as well. Also, Pint of Comics podcast also has launched its own Patreon, and for $2.50 a month, if you like pop culture reviews of varying things, everything from toys, movies, TV shows, you name it, you can go on there. I am slated to be on a future Pint of Comics Patreon pod, as well as a regular episode. John and I have talked about topics, not ready to reveal them just yet, but here's a hint, might be G.I. Joe related. Anyway, while you're listening to the Chaplain's Assistant's Motor Pod, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, rate, leave a 5-star review, or interact with your podcatcher and just tell them how much you either enjoy or just dislike. You know, hopefully it's a 5-star review, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. But doing those kinds of things where you hear this podcast only helps this get better and grow. Also, you can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Chaplain Joe Pod. You can also find it on Facebook at Chaplain's Assistant's Motor Pod, where you'll get pictures of me setting up toys in my basement or just randomonium of mail calls and stuff. It's a great way where I just do quick shares of what's going on in between recordings. And then also you can send an email to chaplainjoepod@gmail.com. So with all of that out of the way, there's just one missile for the masses I want to share with you. Be decent to each other. See ya.